The triangular building on 23rd Street has defined the New York landscape for more than a century. The Flatiron Building rises from a limestone base into walls of pale terracotta. Its narrow cutting between Fifth Avenue and Broadway with a form so distinctive that children recognize it before they learn its name. Few structures on Earth have been photographed as obsessively. It appears in films, paintings, advertisements, postcards, and textbooks. Architects analyze it. Tourists travel across oceans to stand before it. Preservationists fought for decades to shield it from demolition, and they prevailed. The building survived. Yet survival does not guarantee vitality. Since 2019, the Flatiron has stood largely empty, darkened behind its windows, an icon suspended in waiting. Long before the tower rose, the plot at the intersection of Fifth Avenue and Broadway was considered awkward and nearly useless. Manhattan's Commissioner's Plan of 1811 imposed a rational grid across the island's streets running east to west, avenues running north to south. The system functioned with elegant efficiency, except where older paths disrupted its order. Broadway followed the route of a Lenape trail that curved along the island's natural topography. When the grid overlaid the older road, diagonal cuts produced slivers of land at each intersection. Most were small and inconvenient. Developers built modest structures on them when necessary, avoiding height and complexity. The lot at 23rd Street proved especially challenging. It tapered to a razor-thin apex measuring only 29 feet across at its narrowest point. Its base stretched roughly 190 feet along Broadway and another 190 feet along Fifth Avenue, totaling just over 18,000 square feet. The numbers suggested size, but the geometry defied practicality. Standard offices favored rectangles. Furniture aligned with straight walls. Tenants preferred predictable rooms. The wedge offered none of these advantages. For much of the 19th century, a low residential building occupied the site. The neighborhood thrived nearby, with Madison Square just to the north drawing theaters, hotels, and restaurants, yet the triangular parcel discouraged ambitious investment. Everything shifted in 1899 when the George A. Fuller Company sought a dramatic New York headquarters. The firm specialized in steel skeletal construction, a revolutionary method replacing heavy load-bearing masonry with a metal frame. Steel allowed buildings to climb higher while using less material. After founder George A. Fuller's death in 1900, leadership passed to Harry S. Black, who understood architecture as corporate messaging. A headquarters could advertise expertise more effectively than any printed brochure. Black searched for a site that would demonstrate technical mastery under extreme constraints. The triangular lot offered precisely that opportunity. To realize the vision, Black hired Daniel Burnham, already celebrated for his role in shaping the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago. Burnham combined classical aesthetics with modern engineering confidence. He embraced the challenge immediately. Height posed no serious obstacle. Steel frames could easily support 22 stories. The difficulty lay in anchoring the narrow tip and distributing weight across such an irregular footprint. Engineers devised a foundation of deep steel piles driven into Manhattan's bedrock, channeling the load downward rather than outward. Stability would come from depth and precision. Burnham selected a French Renaissance style that emphasized verticality and proportion. Indiana limestone formed the base, conveying solidity and prestige. Above, terracotta panels clad the upper stories. Terracotta weighed less than stone, reducing structural demands, and could be molded into detailed ornament before firing. From street level, the effect resembled carved stone while remaining economical and fire-resistant. As construction progressed, newspapers mocked the project as Burnham's Folly, predicting that winds funneled through Madison Square would topple the slender structure. Work began in 1901. Excavation crews cut through fill and debris to reach bedrock. Steel piles descended deep into the earth, encased in concrete to form a secure footing. By 1902, the steel skeleton rose floor by floor, its triangular outline transforming the skyline. The frame advanced rapidly, demonstrating the efficiency of skeletal construction. Windows were installed to maximize natural light. Elevators connected all 22 stories. Steam, heat, and modern plumbing ensured tenant comfort. When the building opened on October 1, 1902, doubts evaporated. The structure stood firm against the wind. Instead of collapse, the building produced an unexpected spectacle. Air currents accelerated around its narrow prow, creating gusts that swept along the sidewalks. The phenomenon became part of city folklore, drawing onlookers and contributing to the building's notoriety. Photographers quickly recognized its visual power. Among them, Alfred Stieglitz captured moody, atmospheric images that elevated the structure into the realm of fine art. Others followed, framing the tower from Madison Square or from low angles that dramatized its height. Painters translated it into impressionistic studies of light and shadow. The building's triangular silhouette became shorthand for modern New York. Inside, the Fuller Company occupied several floors, while leasing the remainder to publishers and businesses drawn to the prestigious address. The unconventional floor plans proved suitable for firms requiring private offices, rather than vast open halls. Rents remained competitive, and the tower filled quickly. What critics labeled folly became triumph. The name Flatiron Building eclipsed its official title, the Fuller Building, because the iron-shaped form defined its identity more powerfully than any corporate association. The technology behind the structure reflected a broader transformation in architecture. Traditional masonry skyscrapers relied on thick base walls to support weight, limiting height and consuming valuable interior space. Steel skeletons reversed that logic. Vertical columns and horizontal beams bore the load, while exterior walls functioned as non-structural curtains. This innovation allowed greater height without sacrificing usable floor area. The concept had been pioneered in Chicago by architects such as William Lee Barron Jenney with the Home Insurance Building in 1885. By the time Burnham designed the Flatiron, the method had matured. Yet no one had applied it to such an extreme triangular footprint. Within a few years of completion, the Flatiron stood not merely as office space, but as symbol. Its limestone base, terracotta skin, and steel skeleton embodied the union of art and engineering. It transformed a problematic parcel into one of the most recognizable landmarks in the world. More than a century later, even in darkness, its silhouette continues to define the meeting of Fifth Avenue and Broadway. A reminder that bold design can turn geometric inconvenience into enduring identity. After firing at high temperatures, terracotta became fireproof, an essential quality in an era when urban fires posed constant danger. Indiana limestone clad the bottom 4 floors, creating a solid and traditional base that conveyed durability and prestige. The fasce 8 followed a classical tripartite composition. The base extended through the fourth floor, with limestone walls and expansive ground floor windows designed for retail use. Above it, the middle section rose from the 5th to the 18th floor, where repeating terracotta columns emphasized verticality and drew the eye upward. The top 4 floors formed a decorative crown, enriched with more elaborate terracotta ornament and capped by a pronounced cornice. The proportions were rooted in classical design, yet the materials and structural system represented modern innovation. Windows dominated the exterior surface. Office buildings depended on abundant natural light. Electricity was available, but costly and inconsistent, and tenants expected to work by daylight for most of the day. Burnham carefully positioned the windows to maximize sunlight without compromising structural strength. Heavy steel window frames divided each opening into smaller panes, capable of resisting wind pressure at that height. Wind conditions around Madison Square posed a genuine challenge. The open space, framed by surrounding buildings, funneled air currents directly toward the narrow northern prow of the structure. As wind struck the tip, it accelerated along the sides and created strong gusts at street level. Newspapers described hats being swept from heads and pedestrians clutching their clothing against sudden bursts of air. The phenomenon became part of the building's legend, adding spectacle to its already dramatic form. Inside, the triangular footprint dictated an unconventional layout. Rectangular rooms were rare. Long, narrow corridors stretched from the broader southern end toward the thin northern apex. Offices lined these hallways, each occupying a slim portion of the available width. At the northern tip, rooms were so compact they could accommodate little more than a desk and a filing cabinet. The geometry discouraged large corporations that required expansive departmental floors, yet it suited smaller professional firms. Publishers, law offices, architects, and independent practitioners found the narrow spaces practical. The address, at 23 Madison Square, carried prestige, and rent remained reasonable compared to other modern office buildings. Accessibility to public transportation and nearby restaurants added to its appeal. The Fuller Company used several floors as its New York headquarters, leasing the remainder to various tenants. By 1905, occupancy was nearly complete. Businesses willingly adapted to the quirky floor plan in exchange for space. Within Manhattan's most recognizable building, from its opening in 1902, the structure became an instant landmark. Pedestrians used it as a navigational reference point. Photographs multiplied rapidly. Postcards bearing its image sold in large quantities. Travel guides and promotional brochures featured it as evidence of New York's modernity. Its triangular silhouette was instantly identifiable, even to those who had never visited the city. Artists returned to it repeatedly. Winter draped the terracotta in snow. Spring softened the facade with diffused light from Madison Square. Autumn sunsets cast gold and crimson tones across its surface. Each season altered its character. Each angle of view revealed a different personality. Artistic photography and painting found endless inspiration in its geometry. The building's success demonstrated several truths. A site dismissed as impractical could host remarkable architecture when engineering met imagination. Prestige carried tangible economic value, and tenants were willing to accept inconvenience in exchange for a distinguished address. Bold design resonated with the public. What critics labeled folly became an icon precisely because of its unusual shape. For its first 2 decades, the building fulfilled Harry Black's vision. It served as a living advertisement for the Fuller Company's expertise, a profitable investment for its owners, and a symbol of New York's modern spirit. Tenancy stabilized. Maintenance remained manageable. The steel skeleton required fewer structural interventions than thick masonry walls would have demanded. Terracotta panels endured the elements with minimal deterioration. Fires that devastated other Manhattan structures left it unharmed, thanks to its fire-resistant materials. Elevators functioned reliably. Steam heat carried occupants through winter, and upkeep followed the routine patterns of commercial property management. By the 1920s, taller skyscrapers began reshaping Manhattan's skyline. The Empire State Building rose in 1931 to a height of 381 meters, including its antenna, while the Chrysler Building surpassed 300 meters with its gleaming spire. At 77 meters, the Flatiron was no longer among the tallest structures. Yet it remained among the most photographed. Its height was sufficient to dominate Madison Square, without overwhelming the pedestrian experience. Its proportions preserved a human scale that newer skyscrapers often lacked. For 6 decades, the building remained active and nearly fully occupied. The types of tenants reflected shifts in Manhattan's economy. Publishing firms dominated the early years. Companies such as the Frank A. Munsey Company occupied multiple floors, producing magazines and newspapers with large national circulations. Editorial work suited the narrow offices, which required desks, typewriters, and filing cabinets rather than expansive collaborative spaces. The prestigious address enhanced credibility. Architectural firms leased offices as well, signaling their professional standing by operating from one of America's most recognized buildings. The layout provided privacy for consultations, while shared conference rooms supported presentations and reviews. Photographers established studios on upper floors where abundant natural light streamed through large windows. The central location attracted clients, and some photographers specialized in selling views captured from the building itself. Law firms also found the corridor layout advantageous. Smaller practices occupied individual offices, while larger ones leased entire floors. Shared law libraries reduced costs. Separate entrances along corridors allowed for discretion, which clients valued. During the Great Depression, tenancy fluctuated but remained resilient. Some firms dissolved or downsized, yet flexible rental terms enabled owners to refill vacated spaces. The building's symbolic status continued to attract occupants. During the Second World War, certain floors housed government offices connected to wartime administration. Afterward, civilian tenants returned. By the 1950s, the building had reached its 50th year. The steel frame remained robust. Terracotta panels generally endured, though some required replacement due to moisture damage. Mechanical systems aged. Elevators demanded frequent maintenance. Steam heating lagged behind newer technologies. Plumbing occasionally faltered. Owners addressed repairs, but avoided comprehensive modernization. Major renovations would have required substantial capital and tenant displacement, an uncertain investment when steady rental income continued. In the 1960s, preservation entered public discourse. The demolition of the original Pennsylvania station in 1963 ignited widespread protest and galvanized preservationists. The city established the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 1965 to protect significant architecture. In 1966, the Flatiron Building received landmark designation. The status safeguarded it from demolition and required official approval for major alterations to its facade or defining features. Protection ensured survival, but introduced constraints. Renovations required review. Exterior changes had to respect the original design. Flexibility diminished as modern office demands evolved. Companies increasingly favored open floor plans, advanced electrical systems, air conditioning, and specialized infrastructure for computers. The building's small offices, outdated wiring, and inconsistent climate control posed challenges. Upgrading systems would have required invasive work throughout the structure. During the 1970s and 1980s, leasing patterns fluctuated. Larger corporations chose newer buildings equipped with modern amenities. Smaller firms continued to rent space, valuing character and recognition over technological sophistication. Profit margins narrowed, though the building remained operational. Its cultural presence endured. Films and television productions frequently used it as a backdrop, reinforcing its role as a visual shorthand for New York City. Photographs of the Flatiron Building continued to circulate in travel guides, calendars, and advertisements. Artists painted it repeatedly. Architecture students analyzed its proportions and structural logic. Tourists came to Madison Square, specifically to stand before it. Few buildings in New York, aside from the Statue of Liberty and the Empire State Building, achieved such immediate recognition. Fame, however, did not cover maintenance costs. By the 1990s, the structure demanded serious intervention. The terracotta facade required extensive repair. Hairline cracks widened as water seeped inside, froze during winter, and expanded, worsening the damage. In some areas, panels loosened and risked falling to the sidewalk below. Scaffolding surrounded sections of the exterior as restoration crews worked methodically to stabilize the surface. Inside, the elevators required full replacement. The original systems installed at the time of construction had operated for nearly a century, an extraordinary lifespan. Yet mechanical endurance has limits. New motors, control systems, and elevator cabs were installed at considerable cost and inconvenience. Electrical and plumbing systems also showed their age. Early 20th century wiring had never been intended to power computers, fax machines, and modern office equipment. Owners threaded new cables through shafts and corridors where possible, but a comprehensive upgrade would have required dismantling walls across every floor. Ownership changed multiple times during the late 20th century. Each new proprietor inherited the same combination of strengths and burdens: a prestigious address, world, famous architecture, aging infrastructure, and restrictions imposed by landmark protection. Rental income remained steady, but insufficient to justify the tens of millions of dollars necessary for a total overhaul. By the close of the 1990s, the pattern was unmistakable. The building was celebrated publicly and deferred privately. Admiration was abundant. Investment was cautious. Maintenance delays accumulated year after year. At the dawn of the 21st century, new challenges emerged. Modern office culture favored open floor plans, designed for collaboration. The Flatiron's narrow corridors and small cellular offices contradicted contemporary preferences. Heating and cooling systems barely met expectations. The original steam heat remained operational, but inefficient and difficult to regulate. Air conditioning units had been added gradually over decades, creating an inconsistent patchwork that left some rooms overheated and others uncomfortably cold. Complaints from tenants became routine. Electrical capacity lagged behind demand. Offices filled with computers, servers, and digital infrastructure required far more circuits than the building originally possessed. Partial upgrades alleviated pressure, but a complete modernization would have meant dismantling ceilings and walls throughout the structure. Plumbing failures grew more frequent. Pipes dating back to the building's earliest years approached the end of their lifespan. Leaks increased, water pressure fluctuated, and bathroom fixtures belonged to another era. Replacing the entire system would have resembled reconstructing the building from within. The number of elevators posed another constraint. 4 cabs served 22 floors. During peak hours, workers waited several minutes for service. Modern towers offered greater speed and capacity. The triangular footprint left no practical room for additional shafts without sacrificing essential structural components. In the 1990s, ownership passed to developer Harry Macklowe, who recognized both the value and the limitations of the property. The land beneath the building represented some of Manhattan's most valuable real estate. Landmark status prevented demolition and redevelopment. Macklowe explored converting the offices into luxury condominiums. Apartments in one of New York's most iconic buildings promised extraordinary prices. Upper floors offered sweeping views of Madison Square and the surrounding skyline. Historic prestige added intangible value that new construction could not replicate. The proposal encountered significant obstacles. The New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission would need to approve substantial interior alterations. Residential conversion required comprehensive reconfiguration of every floor, new plumbing stacks, kitchens, bathrooms, partition walls, and infrastructure. Historic corridors, staircases, and ornamental elements would require preservation. The Commission rejected the plan, emphasizing that the building's identity as an office structure formed part of its historical character. Altering that function would compromise its legacy. Without condominium conversion, the financial logic weakened. The property continued to produce rental revenue, but not enough to justify a massive investment in modernization while preserving office use. Macklowe eventually sold. In 2018, the Sorgenti Group, an Italian real estate investment firm specializing in historic properties, acquired the building for approximately $190 million, though figures varied in public reporting. The purchase reflected both the intrinsic land value and the long-term potential of the landmark. Plans called for a sensitive restoration that would modernize internal systems while preserving historic character. Initial inspections revealed deeper structural concerns. Terracotta cracking was widespread. Decades of moisture infiltration had corroded portions of the steel frame behind the facade. Certain beams showed visible deterioration. Restoration required removing and replacing sections of cladding floor by floor. Inside, nearly every system demanded full replacement: electrical wiring, plumbing, heating, ventilation, and cooling. Achieving modernization while preserving the historic exterior meant exposing the skeletal frame and rebuilding the interior infrastructure almost entirely. Cost projections escalated rapidly. Early estimates of $50 million rose to $80 million, then $100 million. Comprehensive renovation forecasts exceeded $150 million. Combined with acquisition costs, total investment approached $350 million. Work commenced in early 2019. Tenants received notices to vacate temporarily during construction. In March 2019, the final occupants departed. For the first time since its opening in 1902, the building stood silent. Scaffolding enveloped the facade. Craftsmen examined each terracotta panel individually, marking damaged pieces for replacement. Matching new panels to originals required painstaking precision. Color, texture, and dimension had to align exactly with designs over a century old. Locating specialized manufacturers capable of producing faithful replicas took months. Interior demolition removed outdated partitions and systems, revealing the steel framework beneath. Electrical wiring and plumbing lines were stripped out. Engineers prepared plans for modern infrastructure compatible with historic preservation standards. In March 2020, 1 year into renovation, the COVID-19 pandemic reached New York. Construction slowed and then halted as shutdown orders spread across the city. Workers left job sites. Supply chains faltered. Non-essential projects paused indefinitely. Tourism collapsed. Madison Square, typically filled with visitors photographing the Flatiron, fell quiet. Commercial real estate values declined sharply as remote work reshaped office demand. Sorgente's financial position deteriorated. Its Italian parent company faced mounting debt, worsened by global lockdowns. Revenue from its broader portfolio dropped significantly. Creditors intensified pressure. In August 2020, the parent entity filed for bankruptcy protection in Italy. The Flatiron Building entered legal uncertainty. Renovation stopped. The scaffolding remained. Ownership became entangled in bankruptcy proceedings. Creditors assessed assets. Prospective buyers weighed the risks of acquiring a landmark burdened by restoration costs and complex legal circumstances. Months passed. Then years. The building remained dark. Tourists continued to photograph its silhouette. Though now images captured scaffolding and barricades rather than a vibrant workplace. An icon once celebrated for vitality stood suspended in transition, preserved yet unoccupied, admired yet awaiting renewal. The Flatiron Building endured for 117 years, yet its greatest adversary was not time but economics. In the years before its acquisition by the Sorgente Group, a succession of owners recognized its potential, but failed to discover a profitable path forward. Each purchase carried ambitious plans that ultimately collapsed under the same financial reality. The cost of comprehensive repairs exceeded what the property could reasonably generate as office space. Residential conversion consistently appeared to offer the strongest return. Luxury condominiums in the heart of Manhattan promised extraordinary prices. Developer Harry Macklowe pursued this strategy in the late 1990s, envisioning multi-million-dollar apartments carved from the triangular floors. The location made the concept attractive, but the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission determined that such a transformation would compromise the building's historic integrity. The ruling ended the proposal. Another ownership group explored a boutique hotel model. The idea of guests staying inside one of New York's most recognizable landmarks carried marketing appeal. Premium nightly rates seemed plausible. Yet hotel conversion required substantial structural changes, similar to those demanded by residential adaptation. Regulatory barriers remained formidable, and the concept stalled before implementation. Throughout these shifting visions, the building continued operating as office space, though its tenant profile evolved. Traditional firms seeking advanced infrastructure departed for newer towers. Startups, creative studios, and smaller organizations replaced them, drawn more by prestige than by amenities. Some floors remained vacant for extended periods. Rents stayed relatively modest to sustain occupancy, limiting the revenue necessary to fund major renovations. A cycle took hold. Deferred maintenance worsened conditions. Aging systems discouraged higher paying tenants. Reduced income constrained repair budgets. By 2010, the terracotta facade required urgent attention. Panels loosened and fell, prompting city authorities to mandate protective scaffolding around portions of the exterior. Intended as a temporary safeguard, the scaffolding lingered for years as comprehensive restoration was postponed. Interior systems deteriorated quietly. Electrical capacity struggled under modern demands, leading to outages on certain floors. Spot fixes addressed immediate complaints, but left underlying deficiencies unresolved. The original wiring, installed in 1902, was never designed for continuous digital loads. The HVAC system became increasingly unreliable. Upper floors overheated during summer, while winter temperatures fluctuated despite functioning steam heat. Tenants supplemented conditions with portable heaters and fans, a temporary measure that underscored systemic inadequacy. When the Sorgente Group acquired the building in 2018, industry observers expressed skepticism. The purchase price was high. Renovation costs substantial, and unforeseen expenses likely. Sorgente's experience with historic properties suggested confidence. Financing was secured through its Italian parent company and external lenders who believed in the long-term value of a restored icon. Post-acquisition inspections revealed extensive deterioration. Large sections of terracotta required full replacement rather than patchwork repair. Corrosion affected portions of the steel frame beneath the facade. Restoration demanded scaffolding encasing the entire structure and a methodical, floor-by-floor approach extending over years. Engineers assessed beams and columns individually, treating corrosion with sandblasting and protective coatings. Some elements required reinforcement. The foundations, anchored by deep steel piles embedded in Manhattan bedrock during original construction, remained stable. The base required little intervention. Nearly everything above demanded attention. Sorgente developed a multi-phase renovation strategy. The first phase focused on facade stabilization and steel preservation. The second addressed comprehensive electrical and plumbing replacement. The third introduced a modern HVAC system capable of consistent climate control. The fourth upgraded elevators with faster, more efficient units. The fifth reconfigured interior layouts to provide greater flexibility while respecting historic character. Timelines projected 3 to 5 years of work, with costs ranging from $50 million to well over $100 million depending on discoveries during construction. By March 2019, preparations were complete. Permits were issued, contractors engaged, tenants relocated. For the first time in its history, the building emptied entirely. Scaffolding rose along its triangular walls. Craftsmen removed terracotta panels, cataloging each piece. Damaged elements were set aside for replication. Intact panels were cleaned and stored. The steel skeleton, unseen since 1902, emerged for inspection. Early assessments indicated that while much of the frame remained sound, targeted treatments were necessary. Interior demolition began in non-public areas. Outdated systems were stripped out. Electrical rooms were cleared for modern equipment. Progress in the initial weeks aligned with schedules and projections. In March 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic halted construction across New York. Worksites closed. Labor forces dispersed. Supply chains fractured. The Flatiron Renovation joined countless projects suspended indefinitely. Even when restrictions eased, safety protocols reduced productivity and delayed material deliveries. Schedules unraveled. The economic shock extended beyond construction logistics. Sorgenti's broader portfolio across Europe and the United States experienced revenue declines as retail, hospitality, and office tenants struggled. Pre-existing debt burdens intensified under falling income. Creditors demanded repayment. Liquidity evaporated. In August 2020, Sorgenti's Italian parent company filed for bankruptcy protection in Italy. The Flatiron Building, held by an American subsidiary, became entangled in cross-border legal proceedings. An Italian bankruptcy court assumed oversight of assets. Creditors submitted claims. Prospective buyers evaluated whether acquiring the property from the bankruptcy estate justified the risk and required capital commitment. Renovation activity slowed to a fraction of its original pace. Without stable financing and centralized direction, progress remained sporadic. Scaffolding persisted. Interior spaces stood stripped and silent. The pandemic simultaneously reshaped New York's commercial real estate market. Remote work proved viable for many corporations, reducing the necessity for centralized office footprints. Midtown vacancy rates climbed sharply. Even a fully modernized Flatiron faced an uncertain leasing environment. Tourism, another pillar of the building's symbolic value, collapsed during lockdowns. Madison Square emptied. Restaurants and hotels operated under severe constraints or closed entirely. The vibrancy that had long enhanced the building's desirability diminished. Bankruptcy proceedings continued through 2020 and 2021. The court evaluated asset sales and creditor claims. The Flatiron represented both opportunity and liability. Any purchaser would inherit not only a landmark, but also the obligation to complete its costly restoration. Some creditors advocated immediate sale to recover partial losses. Others urged patience in anticipation of market recovery. Deliberations extended without decisive resolution. Meanwhile, the building remained in limbo. Scaffolding, intended as a temporary measure, became a defining feature of its exterior. An architectural symbol of endurance, stood immobilized by financial complexity, preserved yet unfinished, waiting for conditions that would allow its revival. Originally erected to shield pedestrians during fast aid restoration, the scaffolding around the Flatiron Building eventually became a symbol of paralysis. No active construction moved behind it. City regulations required the protective structure to remain until the terracotta facade was repaired. Yet the ongoing legal and financial turmoil left no party capable of funding the work. The exterior stood wrapped and suspended, neither advancing nor collapsing. Inside, demolition halted mid-process. Certain floors were stripped down to exposed steel, revealing the skeletal frame that had defined early skyscraper engineering. Other areas remained frozen in 2019. Desks and filing cabinets abandoned, as if occupants had stepped out briefly and never returned. Paperwork lingered in drawers. Conference rooms sat intact. The building felt paused rather than vacated. Security became a pressing concern. An empty 22 story structure in Midtown attracted those seeking shelter, expression, or exploration. Guards were hired, entrances boarded, patrols maintained around the clock. The expense added to an already unsustainable financial burden. Meanwhile, the city's Department of Buildings issued violations for neglected repairs as facade panels continued to crack and deteriorate. The danger of falling debris increased. Fines were threatened. Yet enforcement mechanisms proved limited against a property entangled in foreign bankruptcy proceedings. Preservationists grew increasingly alarmed. The Flatiron represented a defining artifact of America's early skyscraper era. Its triangular form had influenced constrained, site architecture around the world. Allowing such a landmark to decay would diminish not only New York's skyline, but architectural history itself. The National Trust for Historic Preservation placed the building on its list of endangered landmarks, underscoring national concern. Raising private donations at the scale required, well over $100 million, was unrealistic. Any viable solution demanded a buyer with substantial capital and a long-term vision. Several prospective investors conducted due diligence and withdrew after reviewing the numbers. Acquisition costs, renovation expenses, and uncertainty surrounding post-renovation leasing formed an equation unattractive to those seeking predictable returns. By 2022, stagnation defined the situation. Conditions were not dramatically worsening, yet nothing improved. Legal proceedings stretched on. Tourists returned to Madison Square and continued photographing the building, though images now included scaffolding and barriers. Postcards depicted a pristine landmark, disconnected from present reality. Local newspapers revisited the same story repeatedly: empty floors, unresolved bankruptcy, no confirmed buyer. In 2023, creditor disputes intensified. Some argued that delay eroded asset value, as prolonged vacancy weakened future leasing prospects. Manhattan's office market struggled to rebound in the wake of remote work's permanence. Vacancy rates remained elevated, and companies reduced space commitments. Negotiations resumed, with debates over lowering the asking price versus preserving creditor recovery. Court deliberations yielded little decisive progress. Reports in 2024 suggested that a consortium of New York developers explored a mixed-use strategy, blending offices with cultural or educational functions. Approval from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission would be required for any significant adaptation. Early discussions hinted at cautious openness to creative solutions that preserved essential historic character while enabling economic viability. By early 2025, however, no finalized agreement had emerged. Ownership remained under an entity controlled by an Italian bankruptcy court. Negotiations persisted. Violations accumulated. Preservation groups watched. The building stood silent. The emptiness of the Flatiron reveals a central paradox in historic preservation. Landmark designation exists to guarantee survival. Yet the restrictions intended to protect integrity can complicate profitable adaptation. Demolition is forbidden, but meaningful modernization is constrained. A renovation exceeding $100 million demands revenue capable of justifying the investment. In optimal markets, prestige might command premium rents, but the building's triangular geometry and mandated corridor layouts limit open plan flexibility. Integrating advanced technical systems into a structure conceived before air conditioning, computers, or modern telecommunications presents formidable challenges. Even if technical barriers are overcome, Market demand remains uncertain. Post-pandemic Manhattan offers abundant Class A office space in newer buildings with fewer constraints. The Flatiron would compete against properties, offering contemporary amenities at comparable rates. Residential conversion once appeared promising, yet proposals were repeatedly rejected by the Landmarks Preservation Commission. The building's uninterrupted history as office space since 1902 constitutes heritage in itself. Transforming it into apartments would erase that continuity. Thus the paradox sharpens. Strict protection intended to secure survival may heighten vulnerability. Preservation requires maintenance. Maintenance requires revenue. Revenue requires viable use. Other landmarks illustrate alternative outcomes. The Woolworth Building endured financial hardship before portions were converted into luxury condominiums in 2015, aided by historical precedent for mixed residential use. By contrast, the Singer Building vanished before preservation laws could shield it. The destruction of the original Pennsylvania station catalyzed the very preservation framework now governing the Flatiron. Experts debate evolution in regulatory philosophy. Some advocate flexible adaptive reuse that maintains defining features while permitting economic sustainability. Others caution that excessive flexibility risks eroding the qualities preservation seeks to defend. Public subsidies offer another theoretical avenue, yet few programs can allocate sums approaching $150 million to a single private sector landmark. Public-private partnerships have succeeded elsewhere but remain legally and financially complex in this case. Proposals periodically surface, suggesting transformation into a museum of architecture or New York history. Symbolically compelling, such a model would require sustained operational funding beyond ticket revenue. Boutique hotel conversion presents another possibility, as narrow corridors and compact rooms could align with the building's geometry. A hybrid strategy combining offices, cultural spaces, hospitality, and limited residential components could diversify revenue and mitigate risk. None of these models progressed meaningfully, while ownership remained frozen in bankruptcy. History provides both caution and optimism. The Mar-a-Lago once faced demolition before conversion into a private club generated the funds necessary for preservation. Flexibility enabled survival. The Flatiron's regulatory constraints restrict such autonomy. Its protection safeguards its form yet confines its adaptability. By 2025, the Flatiron Building still stands. Its steel frame remains structurally sound. The terracotta facade deteriorates gradually but not catastrophically. Physical endurance does not equate to vitality. Once among the most photographed structures in New York, it has become an emblem of preservation's contradiction. Too significant to lose. Too restricted to transform easily. Protected in law but uncertain in purpose. Its darkened windows and empty corridors represent a broader lesson. Cultural icons do not sustain themselves through reputation alone. Legal protection without economic feasibility cannot ensure long-term vitality. The building endures, silent and waiting, embodying the widening distance between survival and life.